Have you ever studied all night, only to forget everything the next morning? Trust me, it's not because you're dumb. It's because you've been learning the wrong way. Today I'll show you a secret that makes you remember like a leech. Once it sticks in your mind, nothing can make you forget. Memory is not a single process, but a beautifully complex system that shapes everything we know, feel, and experience. To remember something for a long time, we first need to understand how our brain actually stores it. Think of your brain as a vast library with billions of books, but the librarian only keeps the books that are meaningful or frequently borrowed. In other words, your brain prioritizes what matters and discards what doesn't seem important. That's why, when we cram before an exam or read without true engagement, most of the information disappears within days. It never gets filed into long-term memory. The process begins in the short-term memory, which acts like a temporary workspace. You can only hold about 7 pieces of information at once, like a phone number or a short list of words. But short-term memory fades quickly, often within seconds. To make something last, it has to move into long-term memory, and that transfer happens through repetition, understanding, and emotion. When you hear, read, or experience something repeatedly, your neurons strengthen their connections, creating what neuroscientists call synaptic plasticity. Every repetition reinforces the pathway, just like carving a deeper trail in a forest the more you walk through it. Emotion is another powerful key to memory. You remember moments of joy, fear, or embarrassment vividly because they trigger the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, which tags those experiences as important. That's why a funny story or a shocking example sticks better than dry facts. If you can link what you learn to an emotional experience, curiosity, surprise, humor, you make it more likely that your brain will store it long-term. So when studying, try to make the material resonate emotionally. Ask yourself why it matters, how it connects to your life, or what it reminds you of. Another crucial factor is understanding. Memorizing without comprehension is like trying to store a book in your mind without reading it. The human brain is wired to remember patterns, relationships, and meaning, not isolated facts. When you understand how a concept fits into a bigger system, your brain creates multiple associations around it. Each association becomes a new access point, making recall easier. That's why teaching others or explaining an idea out loud helps. It forces you to organize your knowledge and see the connections clearly. But even with repetition, emotion, and understanding, memories can still fade if not retrieved. This phenomenon, known as the forgetting curve, was first described by Hermann Ebbinghaus. It shows that we forget most new information within days unless we revisit it. Fortunately, every time you recall something, you interrupt that curve and reset the timer. Retrieval itself strengthens memory more than passive review. So rather than rereading notes, test yourself, summarize from memory, or write down what you remember before checking your materials again. Finally, attention is the gatekeeper of memory. The brain can't store what it never truly noticed. Multitasking, background noise, and distractions all weaken encoding. When you study or learn something new, give it your full attention for short, intense bursts. 10 focused minutes are worth more than an hour of half-aware reading. Over time, this habit trains your brain to enter a deeper state of concentration, making memory formation natural and efficient. In short, remembering for a long time isn't just about effort, it's about working with your brain, not against it. Engage your emotions, understand deeply, repeat strategically, and focus completely. When you learn in this way, what you study becomes more than information. It becomes a part of who you are. The concept of spaced repetition may sound simple, yet it's one of the most powerful and scientifically proven methods for remembering anything long-term. It relies on a core truth about how our memory works. We forget things quickly after learning them, but every time we review the information just before we're about to forget it, the memory becomes stronger and more durable. The process is like forging steel. Each reheating and cooling cycle makes it harder and more resistant to wear. In the same way, each review of a concept reinforces the neural pathways that store it, turning a fragile memory into a permanent one. To understand why spaced repetition works, picture your brain as a field of grass. When you learn something new, it's like walking through tall grass for the first time. You leave a faint trail, The more you walk that same path, especially at spaced intervals, the trail becomes clearer and eventually turns into a well-worn road. However, if you keep walking the same path continuously without breaks, you'll only trample the surface grass. It won't have time to recover and strengthen. The spacing allows your brain's synapses to consolidate the memory during rest, making it more efficient to recall later. This principle is supported by neuroscience studies showing that memory consolidation happens during sleep and periods of rest, not during non-stop study. A practical way to apply spaced repetition is through a schedule like the 1 to 3 7-30 rule. Review what you've learned after one day, then 3 days later, a week later, and finally after a month. Each session doesn't need to be long, just enough to recall the information and test your memory. You'll find that each time, recalling becomes easier and takes less effort. The key is active recall. Don't simply reread notes or watch the same video. Instead, close your book and try to explain the concept out loud, write a short summary, or answer a question about it. This form of retrieval strengthens the connections in your brain far more effectively than passive review. Modern technology makes this even easier. Apps like Anki, Quizlet, or Notion flashcards use algorithms that automatically schedule your reviews at the optimal times, just before you're likely to forget. For example, if you're learning English vocabulary or formulas in physics, these apps can remind you exactly when to review each term. Over time, they adapt to your progress, showing you harder words more often and easier ones less frequently. This adaptive learning mimics how our brains naturally forget and remember, turning study into an efficient, almost effortless process. However, the real art of spaced repetition lies not just in the timing, but in how you review. Mindless repetition can still fail if the content has no meaning or emotion attached. That's why it helps to mix your review sessions with visualization, examples, or even humor. When you connect facts to something personal or emotional, you give your brain another reason to keep that information alive. Similarly, vary your environment or method. Review in different places, use different colors, or teach the content to someone else. Each variation adds a new context cue, making it easier to recall in any situation. Most learners make the mistake of thinking that studying longer means remembering better. In reality, spacing beats intensity. A few short, well-timed reviews across weeks are far more effective than a single night of cramming. The brain thrives on intervals. It treats spaced practice as a sign that the information is important for survival. Every time you come back to the material, your brain decides it must be worth keeping, reinforcing the neural network. In essence, spaced repetition isn't about studying harder, it's about studying smarter. It respects the natural rhythm of your memory: learn, rest, recall, and repeat. When practiced consistently, this method transforms the temporary into the permanent, and knowledge stops being something you struggle to hold on to. It becomes something that stays with you effortlessly. Turning dry information into vivid images and stories is one of the most effective ways to make learning unforgettable. Our brains evolved not to memorize abstract data, but to survive through patterns, images, and narratives. Long before humans had writing systems, knowledge was passed through storytelling, tales of heroes, places, and lessons encoded in imagination. That's why when you try to memorize a list of facts, it feels exhausting. But when you hear a story, the details stick almost effortlessly. The key to long-term memory lies in transforming what's boring into something your brain finds meaningful, emotional, or visual. Imagine you're trying to memorize the order of planets in our solar system. You could repeat Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune over and over, or you could create a short story. My very educated mother just served us noodles. Instantly, the sequence locks into your mind because it's tied to an image and a bit of humor. That's the essence of mnemonics, attaching meaning or emotion to otherwise neutral information. When the brain can see or feel something, it becomes far easier to recall it later. Visualization takes this even further. Let's say you're studying anatomy. Instead of memorizing dry terms, picture the body as a city, the heart as a power plant, the arteries as highways, and the blood cells as delivery trucks. This kind of metaphor activates multiple brain regions, visual, linguistic, and emotional, creating a network of associations that reinforce each other. You're not just remembering words. You're remembering a living scene. The richer the image, the deeper the memory. One powerful technique for turning information into imagery is the method of loci, or memory palace. It dates back to ancient Greece, where orators memorized long speeches by imagining themselves walking through a familiar building and placing ideas in specific rooms. When they needed to recall something, they mentally walked through that space again. You can use this technique for anything: vocabulary, historical events, even business strategies. For example, you could visualize your home, and in each room, store a concept you need to remember. Your kitchen might hold chemistry formulas. Your living room could contain historical dates, and your bedroom could represent key ideas for a presentation. When recall time comes, you mentally walk through your house, retrieving each concept where you left it. Another effective method is story linking. Instead of memorizing isolated facts, turn them into a narrative that flows logically. For instance, if you're learning the causes of World War I, imagine them as characters in a drama: alliance and nationalism arguing, militarism stirring conflict, imperialism fanning the flames. When concepts have personalities, your brain treats them as living entities, making them much easier to remember. You can even exaggerate or add humor to make the associations stronger. The more bizarre or emotional the image, the more it stands out in your memory. For visual learners, mind maps are another powerful tool. They allow you to represent complex topics as interconnected branches radiating from a central theme. When you draw a mind map, you're not just writing. You're designing a visual representation of your thought process. Each color, line, and symbol reinforces structure and meaning. Over time, even if you forget a small detail, the larger pattern helps you reconstruct it intuitively. This mirrors how the brain stores information, through networks and associations, not linear lists. The ultimate goal is to make learning an act of creation, not consumption. When you actively transform information into stories, visuals, and metaphors, you move from passive memorization to active imagination. You're not just storing knowledge. You're weaving it into your internal world, giving it shape and emotion. That's why great teachers tell stories, and great learners build pictures in their minds. Once you start learning this way, facts stop being something you force yourself to remember. They become images, stories, and emotions that you could never forget even if you tried. Learning through multiple senses is one of the most overlooked yet transformative ways to make knowledge stick. Most people try to memorize information by reading or listening alone, but the human brain was never designed to absorb knowledge through just one channel. It thrives on rich multisensory input. Every sense, sight, sound, touch, movement, and even emotion, activates a different part of the brain. The more areas that light up during learning, the stronger the memory becomes. It's like building a house with multiple supports instead of just one. If one connection weakens, others keep the memory standing firm. Think back to a song you loved years ago. You might have forgotten the lyrics, but when the melody starts playing, the words come rushing back. That's not coincidence. It's the power of sensory memory. The brain doesn't just store facts. It stores experiences. When we combine different senses, we transform learning from a flat, one-dimensional act into a full-bodied experience. The more you feel what you're learning, the more deeply you remember it. Start with visual learning. Humans are visual creatures. Nearly 50% of the brain is involved in processing visual information. When studying, use colors, diagrams, and visual cues to represent complex ideas. Replace long paragraphs with sketches, flowcharts, or icons. For example, if you're studying history, create timelines with symbols or portraits. If you're learning biology, draw cells and organs with color codes. Each time you visualize an idea, you give your brain a snapshot to recall later, making recall faster and more intuitive. Then there's auditory learning, which strengthens memory through sound. Reading aloud or listening to your own recorded voice can make an enormous difference. It engages both your speaking and listening centers, reinforcing the information twice over. Try recording summaries of your lessons and replaying them while commuting or exercising. Hearing your own words builds familiarity and rhythm, embedding the content deeper into long-term memory. Similarly, music can be a surprisingly effective anchor. Some people associate certain tunes with lessons or formulas, and the rhythm helps recall them later. Kinesthetic learning, or learning by doing, takes things even further. When you physically interact with what you're studying, writing by hand, building a model, or practicing an experiment, your brain encodes the action along with the knowledge. This is why writing notes by hand is far more effective than typing. The motion of writing creates muscle memory linked to the content. You're literally carving the information into your neural circuits through movement. The same principle applies when you teach others, using gestures, walking, or drawing on a board while explaining. Teaching transforms knowledge from something abstract into something embodied. To go deeper, engage your emotional senses. Emotions act as amplifiers for memory. When you feel passionate, curious, or even challenged, your brain releases chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine, which enhance focus and memory retention. To use this, connect what you learn to something personal. Ask yourself, why does this matter to me? How can I use this in real life? The moment information gains meaning, it stops being just data. It becomes part of your identity. Finally, blend these senses into a single dynamic process. Read aloud while drawing diagrams, explain concepts with hand movements, or visualize scenes as you listen. Switch environments to keep your brain alert. Study in a bright room one day, outdoors the next. Even subtle changes in texture, temperature, or sound environment can create additional cues that help your brain retrieve information later. Each sensory variation becomes another hook in your memory. In the end, learning through multiple senses turns studying into something alive. It's no longer about forcing your mind to remember. It's about giving your brain a rich world to explore. When you listen, see, speak, move, and feel all at once, your brain stops fighting the process. It starts living it. And what the brain lives, it never forgets. A sharp memory doesn't depend only on techniques or repetition. It's also deeply influenced by the state of your body and mind. Your brain is not a machine that works independently from the rest of you. It's a living organ that thrives or suffers based on how well you treat it. Every thought, every recall, every learning session depends on oxygen flow, chemical balance, and emotional stability. That's why no memory system works well without caring for your physical and mental health. A clear mind, good sleep, and a balanced body are the foundation for long-term focus and retention. Let's start with sleep, the most underrated ingredient of memory. During deep sleep, especially in the REM and slow wave stages, your brain sorts through the experiences of the day. It decides what to keep and what to discard, transferring short-term memories from the hippocampus to the neocortex, where they become long-term. When you skip sleep, you interrupt this consolidation process, leaving your memories scattered and fragile. Studies show that even one night of poor rest can cut learning efficiency by up to 40%. So, if you're staying up late to study, you're actually sabotaging the very process that helps you remember. The smartest learners see rest as part of study, not a break from it. Next, consider nutrition. The brain consumes about 20% of the body's total energy, and it needs quality fuel to function at its best. Omega-3 fatty acids, found in fish, walnuts, and chia seeds, help maintain the flexibility of cell membranes, improving communication between neurons. Complex carbohydrates from fruits, oats, and whole grains release energy steadily, preventing mental fatigue. And don't underestimate water. Dehydration, even mild, can impair concentration and short-term memory. Simple rule: feed your brain like an athlete fuels before competition. Physical movement also plays a surprising role. Exercise increases blood flow and oxygen to the brain, stimulating the growth of new neural connections through a process called neurogenesis. It releases endorphins that reduce stress and sharpen focus. Even a 20-minute walk before study can prime your brain to learn faster and retain longer. You don't need an intense workout. Consistent, moderate activity is enough to keep your mind alert and resilient. The brain and body are partners, not separate systems. The healthier your body, the clearer your thoughts. Another key factor is stress management. When you're anxious or overwhelmed, your brain floods with cortisol, a stress hormone that blocks memory formation and recall. That's why you can study hard and still forget everything during an exam. The brain sees stress as a threat and shifts resources from learning to survival mode. To counter this, practice breathing exercises, meditation, or mindfulness before study sessions. Even 2 minutes of slow, conscious breathing lowers cortisol levels, reopening your brain's ability to focus and store information. Calmness isn't just emotional, it's biological preparation for deep learning. Equally important is the Pomodoro technique, a structured way to balance focus and rest. Study intensely for 45 minutes, then take a 10-minute break. During those short breaks, avoid screens. Walk, stretch, or close your eyes. These pauses allow your brain to consolidate micro-memories before the next session. Over hours, this cycle prevents fatigue and sustains high concentration levels. It's not how long you study, but how rhythmically you alternate between effort and rest that determines retention. Lastly, nurture mental positivity. Memory thrives on curiosity and confidence. When you approach learning with dread, your brain treats it as a chore. When you approach it with excitement, it opens up. Surround yourself with inspiration, uplifting music, encouraging people, or meaningful goals. Remind yourself that learning isn't punishment. It's self-evolution. A motivated, joyful brain retains far more than a pressured one. In the end, the best memory strategy isn't just cognitive, it's holistic. Sleep well, eat clean, move often, breathe deeply, balance intensity with rest. When your body and mind align, memory becomes effortless. Knowledge flows naturally, not as something you force, but as something that grows inside you, rooted in energy, clarity, and peace. If you want every study session to push you forward, instead of forgetting what you've learned, then hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because in the next video, I'll show you how to turn your memory into a weapon that helps you conquer every exam and every goal in life.